Hello, my name is Leilani Johnson, and I'm sick, so apologies for not being as articulate as usual. This week is the week of French New Wave, and the two films I watched were Breathless and Hiroshima Mon Amour. The French New Wave film movement was the most fun so far. There were a group of young French film critics who adored movies but weren't rich enough to actually make them, so they published a magazine where they reviewed them in depth. Sound familiar? They really appreciated the medium, but were disappointed with the current state of Hollywood movies, so they made their own, and were determined to break all of the conventions that they thought were diluting the genre they loved. Defining features of the French New Wave movement were directors making their own iconic marks on films. They were inspired by American directors such as Alfred Hitchcock and John Ford, directors they thought made their own marks on their movies. French New Wave films were also notably cheap. These guys didn't have very much money, so they used handheld cameras and creative ways to get the shots they wanted. No professional lighting or expensive rigs. Natural sunlight and wheelchairs will do, as long as you have interns. These directors weren't trying to be different for the sake of being different. Rather, to find creative, alternative ways to grab the audience's attention. Characters would frequently break the fourth wall and address the audience. Jump cuts were an invention utilized for many different purposes. Handheld cameras would linger on characters too long or be too close up to tell what was happening. Deliberate messing with the audience. These directors wanted to mess with you, make you aware that you were watching a movie. Gone were the days when movies were as sacred as Shakespeare. Now onto the first movie, Breathless. Breathless by Jean-Luc Godard was released in France in 1960. It follows a young man named Michel who models his personality on Humphrey Bogart. Within the film's first 5 minutes, he's already smoked enough to gain immediate cancer, stolen a car, killed a policeman, and he's on his way to a girl's house to borrow money from her. He's infatuated with a different American girl named Patricia who sells the New York Herald Tribune on the streets of Paris, who, by the way, I thought was Carol Burnett when I first heard her screaming. It turns out she wasn't. Go figure. He pesters her to go to Rome with him, or sleep with him just one more time. She turns him down on both accounts, but he is so persistent he shows up in her bedroom. They talk and talk about themselves, and during all of this, Michel is on the run from the police. A wanted man, he is on the cover of every newspaper. Somehow, Patricia remains oblivious until a cop personally informs her of Michel's crime and threatens to make her life difficult if she doesn't turn him in. She ends up turning him in, but not for the reasons that she claims. She's attached to Michel, and she doesn't like that, so eventually, in a roundabout way, Michel gets killed by the police. It is unknown how Patricia feels about that. Breathless is a wonderfully self-aware film. At times it's a parody, at times it takes itself seriously, it's an homage to the style of American gangster films while making fun of it at the same time. It's pretty crazy how the French New Wave was inspired by Hollywood when it ended up having a far greater influence on Hollywood. The music is jazzy, loose, sexy. It punctuates weird moments in the movie to throw you farther off guard. Sometimes it's completely absent, and then there will be a sudden xylophone scale that will ring out, and for what reason? Michel is an anti-hero. He shows a complete lack of morals and ethics. He's sexist, selfish, bossy, whiny, and a complete jerk. Can you tell how I feel about him? His only redeeming quality is how much he loves Patricia. He's an anti-hero, much like Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver or the Blues Brothers, but just Jake. I don't like Jake. I was surprised I ended up caring about Michel at all, because by the first 3 minutes of the movie, I had decided I didn't like him. That being said, at no point in the movie did I actually like Michel. I just felt bad for him because he was in love and didn't remotely understand the girl he was dealing with. I feel like male anti-heroes sometimes endear themselves more to the men in the audience than a likable character would. It all depends on who you are. Patricia was a wonderful feminist character that, by comparison, I'm sure a lot of guys would hate. Again, just depends. She was free-spirited and determined to be independent, but unfortunately she had to sacrifice the man she loved to remain that way. While Jean Seberg was notably obviously gorgeous, Patricia wasn't convinced that she was, and Michelle repeatedly told her that she wasn't as pretty as the other girls. However, he liked her spunk, thought she was funny, and could hold a conversation with her. Patricia wasn't absorbed by her beauty. She was self-conscious and had short hair, and she was pregnant, or so she said, and looking into abortion. That was very liberal of her. She also slapped Michelle whenever he sexualized her in a way that she didn't approve of, and women in that time period are not known for doing that. This movie used several innovative and defining features of the French New Wave movement, most notably jump cuts. As Godard said, he went through the film and cut the parts he felt were boring, so the movie never feels like it's dragging or even aimless. It makes you pay even more attention to the movie because you are reminded that you are watching a movie when the continuity is interrupted. At several important moments in this film, characters break the fourth wall and stare directly at the camera. This was utilized best in the opening scene to immediately catch your attention and make you aware that this is a movie you should pay attention to, because it'll throw you off guard. And well used in the final scene to just confuse you even further, if you weren't already. I think the overarching theme of this film is death, but not in a heavy, creepy way. Simply put, both Michelle and Patricia are too young and carefree to really bother with fearing death. Although Michelle is a criminal that doesn't shy away from edging closer and closer to his fate, he doesn't gain any more awareness of it. He just gets tired of running. I know that he did say that he thinks about death a lot in the film, and he's afraid of it. And I think he is, but just like a little boy would be. He's not a very mature person. He's just a thief that steals cars and is horny. So he's just a dude, really. I just don't... As much as he says that he fears death, he doesn't seem to do anything to try and disrupt the absolute down spiral that he's on. So, Patricia causes Michelle's death, even though he brought it upon himself. However, Patricia is so constantly ambiguous that we don't know how she feels about that, although it's obvious that it's not what she intended. I think this movie deserves an 8 out of 10. It's by far the most engaging film we've watched so far, and it has personality. I really liked it. I was very surprised, and also since this is the first French film I've watched, period, I was like, oh, it's kind of, I don't know, it's so much more romantic than the movies that we've been watching before. It felt kind of like a chick flick, but in a good way. The second film I watched was Hiroshima Mon Amour, directed by Alain Resnais. Wow, I really don't know French. Released in France in 1959. I was torn between a lot of options for our second film. So many looked fascinating, and I'm sure I'll get around to watching most of them. But I settled on Hiroshima for 2 reasons. First, it's not often you see a romance with an Asian male lead, in 1959 or today for that matter. Second, I'd never seen a movie that takes place in Hiroshima, and I was interested to see how much of the plot would be focused around that trauma. The answer is surprisingly hard to determine. The movie follows 2 characters who are never named. It's based off a book, so if you look it up, you'll find the characters' names in the book, but they never say them in the movie. A French actress and a Japanese architect. They have an affair while she's filming a movie in Hiroshima and fall for each other very hard. He's accepted it, she has not. She has an intense traumatic history from her hometown of Nevers. She was in a secret relationship with her first love, a German soldier, until he died. She stayed by his side and was punished and outcast for loving him. Her head was shaved, and she was kept in a cellar where she licked salt off the walls and fantasized about tasting her lover's blood. Not the most stable period of her life. She admits this all to her current lover in Japan, who is elated when she tells him that she's never told her husband, and he's now the only one who knows this story. The real antagonist of this story is one's memory. She is distraught that she can no longer remember the harsh details of her German love, and she goes crazy over the fact that she will eventually forget the details of her Japanese love. I mean, that is how the brain works, yes. Honestly, I think it would be a lot easier if that's still how the world worked. No social media so we can keep in contact and trigger midlife crises. You just leave and never see the person again. Eventually forget all the details, truly, of how your past went, and they become fictionalized and fictionalized. I mean, that's how it used to be. I really liked the concept of the story. The director is known for making several films early in his career that delve into the concept of unreliable memory and amnesia. It's a very intriguing topic. However, this movie was so treacherously heavy, especially compared to Breathless. They're total opposites, even in how they use jump cuts. Breathless utilizes jump cuts to jump forward in time. Hiroshima utilizes them to flash backwards in time. Hiroshima Mon Amour is all about coming to terms with your past. I found it very difficult to complete the journal on this film because I could really only find one defining characteristic of the French New Wave. The jump cuts, most obviously. The style of this movie was so devoid of light. It was too dark to be New Wave, but too romanticized to be, like, neo-realistic. The acting was stellar. There were only 2 characters, but they captivated me the entire time. I was always wondering where the story would go next. However, this movie is missing a special something that makes me want to experience it again. Therefore, I would rate it a 6.5 out of 10.